She stood outside the glittering gala in her emerald gown, 5 months pregnant, watching her millionaire husband parade his mistress wearing her anniversary necklace. Security blocked her at the door, her name erased from the guest list. Then her water broke right there on the red carpet while cameras flashed, and Chicago's elite stepped over her like trash. He thought he'd destroyed her completely, stripped her bank accounts, stole their properties, even took their newborn son. But what he didn't know, her grandmother left her a $136 million inheritance, and the woman he threw away was about to become his worst nightmare. This is the story of how a broken wife became an unstoppable force. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe because this revenge is just getting started. The Chicago Four Seasons glittered like a diamond against the November sky. Paige Holloway stood outside the revolving doors, one hand pressed against her 5-month belly, the other clutching her beaded clutch. The emerald gown she wore had cost $2,000. Derek insisted she looked perfect tonight. The Ashford Foundation Gala was his night to shine, and she was supposed to be his perfect accessory. She smoothed the fabric over her stomach and watched the parade of luxury cars depositing Chicago's elite onto the red carpet. Women in couture gowns that cost more than most people's annual salaries, men in custom tuxedos, their watches worth small fortunes. This was Derek's world, their world. She corrected herself, though lately it felt less like theirs and more like his. The baby kicked, a small flutter against her palm. Paige smiled despite her nerves. 7 more weeks until her appointment with the specialist. Derek had promised to come to this one. He'd missed the last 3, always citing urgent business meetings or investor calls that couldn't be rescheduled. She walked toward the entrance, her heels clicking against the pavement. Camera flashes exploded around her like lightning. Photographers lined both sides of the red carpet, shouting names she recognized from business magazines and society pages. The Ashford Foundation Gala was the social event of the season. 500 guests, a silent auction featuring donated items from luxury brands, a 10-course dinner prepared by a Michelin-starred chef. Derek had been planning this for months. He'd been distracted lately, coming home late, taking calls in other rooms. Paige told herself it was just stress. The foundation was his passion project, his way of giving back. He always said, though sometimes she wondered if it was more about the recognition than the charity. Mrs. Ashford, a young woman in a headset, approached quickly. Her smile was bright, but her eyes held something else. Confusion, maybe? Or pity. I'm so sorry, but there seems to be an issue with the guest list. Paige's chest tightened. Issue: my husband, Derek Ashford, is the founder. This is our foundation. I'm literally on the board of directors. The woman glanced at her tablet, then back at Paige. Her voice dropped lower, almost apologetic. Your name was removed from the system this morning. I don't have authorization to let you in. I'm really sorry. This must be some kind of mistake. The world tilted sideways. Paige stepped forward, her heels unsteady on the carpet. Through the glass doors, she could see the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks. Ice sculptures shaped like swans reflected colored lights. Women in gowns that cost more than cars circulated with champagne flutes. Everyone who mattered in Chicago was inside. And there, at the center of it all, stood Derek. Her husband of 3 years wore his charcoal Tom Ford suit, the one that made his shoulders look broader than they were. His dark hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. His smile was perfect, practiced and bright. Everything about Derek Ashford was perfect. He'd cultivated that image carefully. The self-made millionaire from humble beginnings. The philanthropist who cared about giving back. The devoted husband. Except for the woman on his arm, Vanessa Cole couldn't have been older than 24. Her red dress clung to her body like it had been painted on. Her blonde hair cascaded over one shoulder in perfect waves. Around her neck sparkled the Tiffany diamond necklace Derek had given Paige on their 2nd anniversary. The same necklace Paige thought was being cleaned and repaired. Ma'am, I need you to step aside. A security guard materialized at her elbow. His hand hovered near her arm but didn't touch. Not yet. His face was professionally neutral, but his eyes held that same pity. He knew exactly what was happening. Paige watched Derek lean down and whisper something in Vanessa's ear. The girl threw her head back and laughed, her hand resting possessively on his chest. The cameras loved it. Flash after flash captured the moment. Derek's hand rested on Vanessa's lower back, possessive and comfortable, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. How long had this been going on, ma'am? The guard's voice was firmer now. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. If you don't go voluntarily, I'll have to escort you out. I'm pregnant. The words came out smaller than Paige intended, weaker. I'm 5 months pregnant with his child. We picked out names together. He promised he'd be there for the ultrasound next week. The guard's expression didn't change. He'd probably seen worse. Rich people destroyed each other all the time in this city. It was practically a sport. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. More photographers turned their cameras toward the commotion. Paige saw the exact moment they realized what was happening, saw the hungry gleam in their eyes. This was better than celebrities kissing, better than fashion statements or charity donations. This was a scandal unfolding in real time. The pregnant wife being turned away while the husband paraded his mistress. Someone shouted a question she couldn't quite hear over the rushing in her ears. Then the pain hit, sharp and sudden, low in her belly, like a knife twisting. Paige gasped and doubled over, her clutch falling from her hands. Warm liquid ran down her legs, soaking through the emerald silk. Her water had broken, right there on the red carpet, with 100 cameras pointed at her face, with Chicago's elite streaming past her like she was invisible. Oh God! The woman with the headset stumbled backward, her hand over her mouth. The security guard finally touched her arm, his grip firm but not rough. We need to get you to a hospital, right now. But the doors had opened. Guests in tuxedos and gowns were pouring out, drawn by the commotion like moths to a flame. They formed a circle around her, their faces a blur of shock and morbid curiosity. No one moved to help. No one offered a coat or called for an ambulance. They just stared, their phones out, recording her humiliation for social media. Someone was definitely recording on their phone. She could see the red light. Paige looked up, searching desperately for Derek. He stood in the doorway now, Vanessa still pressed against his side like they were posing for a magazine cover. Their eyes met across the crowd. He smiled. Not a warm smile, not the smile he'd given her on their wedding day or when she told him she was pregnant, not the smile from their honeymoon in Bali or lazy Sunday mornings in bed. This smile was cold and calculated. Empty. It said everything his mouth didn't need to. You're nothing. You never were. This was always the plan. Then he turned his back and guided Vanessa inside. The doors closed behind them with a soft, final click. Paige felt her knees buckle. The concrete was cold and rough against her skin. Someone screamed for an ambulance. The cameras kept flashing. Each burst of light felt like a physical blow, burning into her retinas. Her dress was soaked. She could feel the wetness spreading, could see the stains on the expensive fabric. This was supposed to be their night, their foundation, their life together. Instead, Paige Holloway lay crumpled on the sidewalk, bleeding through her designer gown, while Chicago's elite stepped over her to get to the champagne and canapes. The ambulance took 14 minutes to arrive. It felt like hours. She counted every second, focusing on breathing through the contractions that were coming faster now. The paramedics were kind. They wrapped her in blankets and spoke in soothing voices. But their eyes held that same pity everyone's eyes held tonight. As they loaded her into the ambulance, Paige caught one last glimpse of the Four Seasons. The windows glowed warm and golden. Inside, Derek was probably making his speech, thanking donors, accepting praise, playing the role of devoted philanthropist. And she was being hauled away like garbage. Paige woke to fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant. Her mouth tasted like copper and something medicinal. The hospital gown scratched against her skin. For one blissful moment, she forgot where she was, forgot everything that had happened. Then she remembered everything. Her hands flew to her stomach. Still round, still there. The baby. Oh God, the baby. A nurse appeared at her bedside, middle-aged with kind eyes and tired shoulders. The kind of face that had seen too much suffering and still chose compassion. Your baby is fine, honey. You had premature labor, but we stopped it with medication. You're going to be on bed rest for a while, but the baby is strong. Heartbeat is perfect. Paige's throat closed around the relief. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Thank you. Thank you so much. Your husband hasn't called. The nurse's tone was carefully neutral, but Paige heard the judgment underneath. Do you have anyone else we can contact? Parents, siblings, friends? The word husband stabbed through her chest like broken glass. Paige reached for her phone on the bedside table with shaking hands. 23 missed calls. Her heart leaped until she saw none were from Derek, all from blocked numbers. Reporters probably. Vultures circling the kill. She opened her banking app with trembling fingers. Account access denied. Please contact your financial institution for more information. Her credit card app showed the same message. Her PayPal account was frozen. Even the joint savings account they'd opened to save for the baby's college fund was inaccessible. She tried Derek's phone, straight to voicemail. His office line rang and rang. When someone finally answered, it was his assistant, Rebecca's voice, cold and professional in a way it had never been before. Mr. Ashford is unavailable. Please don't call this number again. Rebecca, it's Paige. I'm in the hospital. I need to speak to Derek right now. Mr. Ashford has made it clear he doesn't wish to be contacted. If you continue calling, we'll have to involve the police. The line went dead. Paige sat in the narrow hospital bed, staring at the beige walls. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. They'd been married 3 years. They'd met at a charity auction. He'd pursued her relentlessly, sending flowers every day for 2 weeks. They'd gotten married in a small ceremony in Napa Valley. She was carrying his child. They'd spent hours debating whether to paint the nursery blue or yellow. He'd rubbed her feet when they swelled, held her hair when morning sickness kept her bent over the toilet. How could that man be the same one who smiled at her on that red carpet? A doctor appeared with a clipboard. Young, maybe 30, with the exhausted eyes of someone pulling a double shift. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd rather be anywhere else. Mrs. Ashford, I need to inform you that your insurance has been canceled, effective immediately. We can keep you overnight for observation, but after that, you'll need to make payment arrangements or transfer to a county facility. Canceled. Paige's voice cracked. That's impossible. We have platinum coverage through Derek's company. I checked it last month when I had that scare with the bleeding. The doctor's expression softened with something like pity. According to our billing department, your husband called this morning and had you removed from his policy. He said you were separated and no longer his financial responsibility. I'm very sorry. He left quickly, probably to avoid watching her fall apart. Paige didn't cry. Couldn't cry. The shock was too complete. She felt like she was watching this happen to someone else, like she was floating somewhere near the ceiling, observing this pathetic woman in a hospital gown being systematically destroyed. She called the one person she had left. Aunt Judith, I need help. Her aunt arrived within the hour, elegant even in emergency mode. Judith Holloway was 65, her gray hair perfectly styled, her cashmere coat impeccable. She took one look at Paige and her jaw tightened with fury. That bastard, that absolute bastard. Judith pulled Paige into her arms, and finally done. Paige let herself cry. 48 hours later, Paige stood on the sidewalk outside Derek's penthouse. Their penthouse, the building where they'd lived for 2 years, where she'd learned she was pregnant, where she thought they were building a life. The doorman, Carlos, who used to greet her warmly every morning, wouldn't meet her eyes. Her belongings sat in black trash bags piled against the curb like garbage waiting for collection. Clothes, books, photos. The framed picture from their honeymoon. Her grandmother's china. Everything she owned reduced to trash bags. A few early morning joggers gave the bags wide berth. Like poverty might be contagious. Paige's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number with an attachment. Her hands shook as she opened it. The screen showed legal documents. Property transfer papers. Dated 6 months ago. Their Lake Forest house. The vacation condo in Aspen. The investment properties she didn't even know they owned. All transferred from joint ownership to Derek's name alone. Her signature appeared at the bottom of each document, except Paige had never signed them, had never even seen them before this moment. She zoomed in on the forgery. It was good, really good. Someone had studied her signature carefully, but the loop on the P was wrong. Too narrow, too sharp. Derek had been planning this for months. While she was struggling through morning sickness, crying in bathrooms at work, Terrified of losing this baby like she'd lost the first one, he was systematically erasing her from their life. Another text came through. This one was a video link with a message, "Thought you should know." Paige clicked it with trembling fingers. TMZ's website loaded. Garish and sensational. The headline made her stomach drop. Chicago mogul Derek Ashford's secret Hawaiian romance. The video showed Derek and Vanessa on a beach. White sand, azure water. They wore matching swimsuits, his navy trunks and her white bikini, champagne and crystal flutes. Him kissing her neck while she laughed, her head thrown back in exaggerated delight. The timestamp was from August, 3 months ago. August, when Derek told Paige he had an investors conference in Seattle, when she'd been 11 weeks pregnant, still throwing up every morning, terrified of miscarrying. She'd called him crying one night, scared because of some spotting, and he'd told her she was being dramatic, that she needed to calm down or the stress would hurt the baby. He'd been in Maui with his mistress. The video continued. Derek and Vanessa swimming in the ocean. Derek and Vanessa having dinner on a private balcony. Derek fastening that Tiffany necklace around Vanessa's throat, the one he'd told Paige was being cleaned. How many lies? How many times had he looked her in the eye and lied? Aunt Judith's silver Mercedes pulled up to the curb. Her aunt was dressed impeccably as always, but her eyes blazed with fury when she saw the trash bags. "Get in the car, Paige, right now." They drove in silence through morning traffic, past the coffee shop where Paige and Derek used to get lattes on Sunday mornings, past the park where he'd proposed. Every landmark was now tainted, poisoned by betrayal. Judith pulled up to a modest condo in Lincoln Park. Nothing like the penthouse with its lake views and marble floors, but clean, furnished, safe. "This is yours for as long as you need it," Judith said, handing her a set of keys. "I'm going to explain something, but you need to be sitting down, and you need to understand that what I'm about to tell you changes everything." Inside, Judith made tea. Neither of them would drink. Then she opened a leather briefcase and pulled out a thick folder bound with ribbons. "Your grandmother Margaret didn't just leave you her jewelry when she died. She left you 40% of Holloway Industries." Paige blinked. The words didn't make sense. "What? Aerospace contracts? Military suppliers? Government contracts? The company is worth $340 million. Your share is $136 million. The numbers were too big. They stopped making sense. Paige had met her grandmother exactly twice before the old woman died 5 years ago. Margaret Holloway had been cold, distant, disapproving. She'd attended Paige's wedding with barely concealed disdain, left early, never sent a gift. "Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't she tell me?" Judith's expression hardened. "Because the trust only activates under specific conditions. You had to have a child and face significant adversity. Margaret wanted to make sure you weren't targeted by fortune hunters. She wanted you to know who really loved you before the money became a factor." The irony was so sharp it cut. Paige laughed, a bitter sound that turned into a sob. "Too late for that. Derek doesn't know about the inheritance. Neither does his lawyer. If they find out now, before the divorce is finalized, they'll claim you deceived him, that the prenup is void because you withheld material information. He could take half." Paige looked down at her belly, felt the baby move, a small flutter against her palm. Derek had destroyed her, humiliated her, stolen everything they built together, thrown her away like she was nothing. But he didn't know she had this. "What do I do?" Judith smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd survived in a man's world by being smarter and more ruthless than any of them. "You stay quiet. You let him think he won. You play the victim perfectly. And then, when the time is right, when you have everything in place, you destroy him completely." 1 month later, Paige sat across from Simone Ricci in a cramped law office that smelled like burned coffee and desperation. The building was in a sketchy part of town, nothing like the gleaming towers where Derek's lawyers worked. But Simone had a reputation. She was the lawyer you hired when you wanted to fight dirty and win. Simone was 38, with sharp eyes and sharper suits. Her desk was organized chaos, files stacked precisely, every document tabbed and highlighted. She'd made a career out of crushing wealthy husbands in divorce court. "Your case is strong," Simone said, flipping through documents with efficient precision. We have proof he committed fraud with the property transfers, forged signatures. The prenup becomes completely invalid if either party commits a felony during the marriage. You'll get at least half of everything, plus substantial child support, maybe even alimony given his income level. Paige wanted to feel hopeful. She tried to feel hopeful, but the knot in her chest wouldn't loosen. When can I see my son? The judge ordered DNA testing, standard procedure in contested paternity cases. Once paternity is confirmed, which we know it will be, you'll get temporary custody pending the full hearing. That should be any day now. The results came back 3 days later. 99.9% match. Ethan William Ashford was definitively Derek's biological son. The judge granted Paige temporary custody and ordered Derek to pay $8,000 monthly in support, for the first time since the gala. Paige let herself breathe. She set up the nursery in her tiny second bedroom, assembled the crib alone at 2 in the morning, cursing when the screws didn't line up and the instructions made no sense, washed all the tiny clothes in hypoallergenic detergent, crying when she saw the onesies with little elephants Derek had picked out, practiced swaddling on a stuffed bear Aunt Judith bought, watching YouTube videos over and over until her hands learned the motion. Ethan arrived 3 weeks later, delivered by a social worker with sympathetic eyes. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, perfect tiny fingers and toes. He had Derek's dark hair and Paige's gray eyes. When the social worker placed him in her arms, something cracked open in Paige's chest, something fierce and protective and absolutely ruthless. She would burn the world down before she let Derek hurt this child. 2 weeks after bringing Ethan home, she'd fallen into a routine. Wake at 3 a.m. for feeding, wake at 6 for another, catch sleep in 15-minute increments. The exhaustion was crushing, but beautiful. Every time Ethan looked at her with those gray eyes, every time he wrapped his tiny fist around her finger, she felt stronger. Then came the knock on her door. The man standing there wore a cheap suit and held a badge. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm Detective Carson with Child Protective Services. We received a report of suspected drug use in the home. I need to come inside and assess the situation for the welfare of the minor child." Paige's blood went cold. "What? That's insane. I've never used drugs in my life. I don't even drink." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside. This is a court-ordered welfare check." She had no choice. She watched, Ethan screaming in her arms, while the detective searched her apartment methodically. He found nothing in the kitchen cabinets, nothing in the bathroom medicine cabinet, nothing in her bedroom dresser. But when he checked the diaper bag hanging by the door, his expression changed. He pulled out a small plastic bag of white powder tucked in the side pocket, hidden behind the wipes and diapers. "Mrs. Ashford, I need you to put the baby down right now." "That's not mine." Paige's voice cracked with panic. "Someone planted that. This is a setup. Derek did this. He's trying to take my son." "Ma'am, please put the baby down and step away from him." "No, you can't take him. Please." More people arrived, social workers with clipboards and sad eyes. They were professional, efficient, kind even, but they took Ethan from her arms despite her screaming, took him while he cried, his little face red and confused, took him while Paige begged and pleaded and promised she'd never touch drugs, would never put her son in danger. "We'll schedule a hearing within 48 hours, the social worker said, not unkindly. "If you test clean and your home is deemed safe, you can petition for his return. But for now, he'll be placed in temporary foster care." "No, he needs to nurse. He only takes breast milk, please." But they were already leaving, taking her baby down the stairs. She could hear his cries echoing in the stairwell, getting fainter as they carried him away. The door closed. Paige stood alone in the suddenly silent apartment. Ethan's blanket lay crumpled on the floor. His bottle sat on the counter, half full. The mobile above his crib turned slowly, playing that lullaby she'd sung to him every night. She collapsed on the floor and finally, broke completely. Great heaving whunks that shook her whole body. This was Derek's work. She knew it with absolute certainty. He'd somehow planted evidence in her home and then called it in. He was trying to destroy her so completely she'd have nothing left to fight with. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The message was a photo. Vanessa Cole, pouting at the camera in that practiced Instagram way, holding Ethan in her arms. The baby was crying. The caption read, "Excited to be a stepmom. Already love this little guy so much." Heart emoji, baby bottle emoji. Paige threw the phone across the room. It shattered against the wall. Then she screamed. The psychiatric facility was quieter than Paige expected. No screaming, no chaos like in movies. Just soft voices and the smell of lavender air freshener that didn't quite mask the underlying scent of industrial cleaner. She'd been here 2 weeks. Voluntary admission after her breakdown in the courthouse. The judge had taken one look at her, hollow-eyed and shaking, weighing 98 pounds with unwashed hair and bruises under her eyes from lack of sleep, and ordered a psychiatric evaluation before reinstating any custody rights. Derek's lawyer, the expensive one in the $3,000 suit, had argued she was mentally unstable, dangerous even. Paige couldn't even disagree. She'd stopped eating, couldn't sleep without nightmares, couldn't close her eyes without seeing Ethan's face, hearing his cries. Every time she tried to function, panic attacks crushed her chest until she couldn't breathe. The facility was actually peaceful. Clean white walls, therapy 3 times a day, medication that made the world softer around the edges. Other women who'd been broken by life in various ways. They didn't judge, didn't pity, just existed together in their shared brokenness. Aunt Judith visited every day without fail, brought food Paige couldn't eat, read news articles about Derek's foundation that made Paige want to vomit, talked about weather and traffic and everything except what mattered because talking about Ethan made Paige start crying and not stop. Today, Judith carried a locked briefcase. "You're getting better," Judith said. It wasn't a question. Her aunt had always been direct. Paige nodded. The medication helped. The therapy helped. Mostly, rage helped. Cold, clarifying rage that burned through the fog of depression and left something sharp and focused behind. She was done crying, done being destroyed. Derek thought he'd won, thought he'd broken her completely. He was wrong. Good, because we need to talk about your inheritance, about what it really means. Judith opened the briefcase with a small key she wore on a chain around her neck. Inside were stacks of documents bound with blue ribbons, stock certificates, property deeds, corporate filings, legal documents so dense with text they made Paige's head hurt. Your grandmother wasn't just wealthy. Paige, she was strategic, ruthless even. Holloway Industries has government contracts worth billions over the next decade. Defense systems, satellite technology, communications networks. Your 40% gives you real power. The kind of power men like Derek spend their lives trying to acquire. Derek's lawyers will find out eventually. They're probably already investigating. They're definitely investigating. I got a subpoena yesterday for Margaret's estate records. They know something exists. They just don't know what yet or how much. Judith leaned forward. If they prove you knew about this before you married Derek, everything changes. The prenup becomes void. But more than that, they'll paint you as a gold digger who trapped him. You'll lose everything, including any chance at custody. Paige stared at the documents. Numbers so large they stopped making sense. So what do I do? Judith's expression hardened into something almost frightening. You fight smart. I've already transferred assets into a blind trust. Multiple layers of corporate structures. Derek can't touch what he can't trace. But we need leverage, real leverage, the kind that makes him too scared to fight back. Like what? Like proof he's a criminal. Like evidence that would send him to federal prison for 20 years. Paige looked at her aunt, really looked at her. Judith had survived in business for 40 years by being smarter and more ruthless than any man in the room, had built empires and destroyed enemies, and now she was offering to teach Paige how to do the same. Tell me everything. Simone Ricci's new office was downtown, 3 times bigger than her old space. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, original art on the walls. Business was good. Divorcing wealthy men paid very well, especially when those men were stupid enough to commit fraud. I want you to meet someone, Simone gestured to the man sitting in the corner. Luke Brennan looked like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under his eyes, stubble on his jaw. His shirt was wrinkled and his tie hung loose, but his handshake was firm and his gaze was steady when he met Paige's eyes. Luke was Derek's business partner, Simone explained, until Derek forced him out 2 years ago and stole his share of the company. Nice to meet you, Paige said carefully. Something about Luke's intensity made her nervous. Luke's laugh was bitter. Derek destroyed my life 2 years ago. Forged documents, just like he did to you. Made it look like I'd been embezzling from clients. I lost everything. My reputation, my marriage, my house. I nearly went to prison. Only didn't because I had one lawyer who believed me and found enough reasonable doubt. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to help you destroy him. Luke pulled a flash drive from his pocket, holding it up like a weapon. Derek's been running a Ponzi scheme through the Ashford Foundation for 3 years, taking investor money, paying old investors with new money. Classic pyramid structure. He's funneled millions through offshore accounts. The Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Singapore. Paige's heart beat faster. Can you prove it? I can if you get me access to his current financial records. I have the historical data, the patterns, the account numbers, but I need the recent transactions to build an airtight case. Simone smiled like a shark. Your friend Becca Walsh is an investigative journalist, right? What if she went undercover at Derek's company, got herself hired, got access? 3 days later, Becca sat in Paige's living room eating pizza and plotting corporate espionage. She dyed her hair blonde and wore thick-rimmed glasses that changed the shape of her face. Her fake resume listed experience at companies that didn't exist but had websites Luke built overnight. I got hired as his executive assistant, Becca said, grinning. Start Monday. This is insane, like potentially illegal insane. We could all go to prison for this. Are you saying you don't want to do it? Paige asked quietly. Are you kidding? This is the story of the decade. Plus, Derek's a monster. Someone needs to take him down. Becca bit into her pizza. How much access do you need? Everything, Luke said. Emails, calendar, financial records, meeting notes, client lists. I need to trace every dollar that goes through that foundation and prove it's a fraud. Paige had gotten supervised visitation rights after passing 3 drug tests. 4 hours every Saturday with a social worker present. It wasn't enough. Would never be enough. But she could hold Ethan, smell his baby smell, sing him the lullabies she'd sung before. The social worker, a kind woman named Maria, had quietly told Paige she didn't believe the drug allegations, that something felt off about the whole situation. But rules were rules. Until the investigation was complete, Ethan would remain in foster care. Derek's lawyer had filed for full custody. The hearing was in 6 weeks. If we're doing this, we need more than financial records, Luke said, bringing them back to reality. The FBI has been investigating the foundation for months, but they need a whistleblower, someone on the inside willing to testify and provide documentation. That's suicide, Becca pointed out. Derek would destroy anyone who turned on him, professionally, legally, maybe even physically. Not if he's already destroyed when the information goes public. Luke's smile was sharp and cold. We just need to be smart about timing. Hit him from multiple angles simultaneously. Financial crimes, custody fraud, property fraud. Bury him under so much evidence he can't fight back. Paige looked around at this strange team. A lawyer hungry for justice and the win that would cement her reputation. An ex-partner seeking revenge and vindication. A journalist chasing truth in the Pulitzer-worthy story. All of them damaged by Derek in different ways. She thought about Ethan in foster care, about the gala where she'd been destroyed, about every lie Derek had told, every promise he'd broken. How long do we have? 4 weeks until the custody hearing, Simone said. We need everything ready by then. Financial records, testimony, evidence the FBI can't ignore. We get one shot at this. If we miss, Derek buries all of us. Then we better not miss. Grant Morrison looked nothing like Paige expected. Tech billionaires were supposed to be young and casual, hoodies and sneakers, maybe a man bun. Grant wore a tailored navy suit that probably cost $5,000 and moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned every dollar he had. His hair was silver at the temples despite being only 40. His eyes were sharp and assessing, the eyes of someone who saw patterns others missed. He'd asked to meet at his downtown office, 52nd floor of a gleaming tower, Windows overlooking Lake Michigan, stretching to the horizon. The view was stunning. The kind of view that reminded you there were bigger things than your problems, even if your problems felt all-consuming. Your aunt asked me to help protect the Holloway Trust, Grant said, gesturing for her to sit. His office was minimalist. Clean lines. No clutter. A standing desk with 3 monitors. I've known Judith for 20 years. She's the one who funded my first startup when every other investor told me I was too young and my ideas were too risky. Page sat carefully in the leather chair across from his desk. I don't understand what a tech CEO can do about a custody battle. I run a cybersecurity firm, Morrison Security Systems. We protect corporate data, trace digital footprints, find things people desperately don't want found. He slid a tablet across the desk. Like this. The screen showed email chains between Derek and his brother Troy. Dozens of messages plotting strategy, discussing how to forge documents convincingly, planning the custody case timeline. One message, dated 2 months before the gala, made Paige's hands shake. Once we prove she knew about the inheritance, I'll get half the money in full custody. Then we can finally be rid of her. Vanessa's already talking about redecorating. Kid can go to boarding school. They've been planning this for months, Grant said quietly. Troy's law clerk, a guy named Mitchell who's drowning in student debt, forged the emails they're planning to use against you, made it look like you researched the Holloway Trust extensively before marrying Derek, built a whole false digital footprint. Paige couldn't breathe. The betrayal went so much deeper than she'd imagined. Can you prove the emails are fake? Already done, metadata doesn't lie. I can trace every keystroke back to Troy's office computer. Specific terminal, specific login credentials, IP addresses, timestamps. The clerk wasn't even smart about it. Probably figured no one would check. Grant paused, his expression darkening. But there's more. Derek's financial crimes go deeper than Luke knows. He's not just running a Ponzi scheme. He's laundering money for investors who don't ask questions about where their returns come from. You mean drug money? Among other things. Arms dealers, human traffickers, people who need dirty money cleaned. Grant's jaw tightened. I lost my wife 3 years ago, Rebecca. She died during childbirth. Complications the doctors should have caught. Our daughter Charlotte died with her. 8 hours of labor, and I lost them both. The pain in his voice was raw, despite the years. Paige reached across the desk instinctively, touching his hand. His skin was warm. I'm so sorry, I can't imagine. Men who abandon pregnant women, who use their own children as weapons, who treat women like they're disposable. They're the worst kind of cowards. Grant turned his hand over, squeezing her fingers gently. I'll help you destroy him. Not just legally, completely. I want him to lose everything the way he tried to make you lose everything. Something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. 2 people who'd both lost everything learning to fight back. Learning that sometimes survival means becoming someone you never thought you could be. Paige pulled her hand away reluctantly. The custody hearing is in 3 weeks. Then we have 3 weeks to build an airtight case. Grant stood, all business again. Luke's evidence is good, but not enough for criminal charges. We need Derek caught red-handed, actually committing a crime. And I know exactly how to make that happen. How? He has a meeting scheduled next week with a Russian investor named Volkov. Very shady, very illegal. The FBI's been trying to get evidence on Volkov for 5 years. If we can record Derek accepting dirty money, making deals to launder it through the foundation, that's conspiracy, that's racketeering, that's 20 years in federal prison. Can't use illegally recorded conversations in court, Paige said. She'd learned that much. No, Grant agreed. But we can give them to the FBI and let them get their own warrant for the real thing. We point them in the right direction. They do the rest legally. Paige looked out at the lake. Boats cutting white trails through blue water. The city sprawling in every direction. Somewhere out there, Derek was living his life, sleeping soundly, probably congratulating himself on how perfectly his plan had worked. Let's do it. The plan was simple, insane, probably illegal in several ways, but simple. Becca had been working as Derek's executive assistant for 2 weeks. She'd learned his patterns, his habits, his tells. Learned he took calls from certain numbers in his office with the door closed. Learned he met with specific people late at night when the building was mostly empty. Every night she copied files onto an encrypted drive hidden inside a lipstick case Grant had given her. Every morning she smiled and brought Derek his coffee exactly how he liked it and pretended to be impressed by his stories about deals and investors. He's meeting with Volkov tomorrow night, Becca told the team over video call. They'd stopped meeting in person. Too risky if Derek had hired investigators. 9 p.m., conference room on the executive floor. Very shady, very illegal. Luke, you were absolutely right about the money laundering. Luke nodded grimly from his screen. Volkov's been under FBI investigation for years, but they can never prove anything. If we can record Derek making a deal with him, accepting dirty money, agreeing to launder it through the foundation, that's conspiracy. Can't use illegally recorded conversations in court, Simone pointed out from her screen. She was eating Chinese food directly from the container. No, Grant agreed from his screen. He was in his office still, working late. But we can give them to the FBI and let them get a warrant for the real thing. Anonymous tip from a concerned citizen who happened to witness suspicious activity. Paige listened to them plot, feeling like she was watching a movie about someone else's life. 3 weeks ago, she'd been standing in a psychiatric facility, hollow and broken, unable to imagine a future. Now she was planning to take down a millionaire with a team that sounded like they should be in a heist movie. There's a problem, she have a "Oh, sure, humbug," she said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her on their screens. Derek's not stupid. He'll suspect it's something if the FBI suddenly raids him the day after meeting Volkov. He'll lawyer up, destroy evidence. He has the resources to make things disappear. So we give them multiple reasons to investigate that aren't connected to us, Grant said. Layer it, anonymous tip about the foundation, public interest story that forces their hand, whistleblower complaint, hit him from multiple angles simultaneously so he doesn't know which fire to put out first. Becca grinned. I can do that. My editor's been begging for a follow-up to the charity fraud piece. What if I publish tomorrow morning before the Volkov meeting, full expose with all Luke's documents? Derek will be scrambling to do damage control, won't even see the FBI coming. He'll know you're the source, Paige protested. He'll destroy you. So I'll have already quit and disappeared. I'm a journalist. Protecting sources is literally my job. Plus, my editor will back me. This story's too big, and I'll be the reporter who took down Derek Ashford. Becca's smile was fierce. That's career-making stuff. The plan came together piece by piece over 2 hours of video calls and encrypted messages. Becca would publish her story at 6 a.m. before Derek woke up. The article would detail the Ponzi scheme, name investors, show financial records. Luke would simultaneously submit a formal whistleblower complaint to the FBI with all his evidence. Grant would send his metadata analysis to the State Bar Association, proving Troy forged documents. By noon, Derek's world would be on fire. By evening, when he met with Volkov, he'd be desperate. Desperate men make mistakes, and they'd record every second of it. And me, Paige asked. What do I do? Simone's smile was sharp through the screen. You go to your custody hearing in 3 weeks and watch him implode. You stay clean, stay quiet. Let us do the dirty work. When this is over, you'll have your son back, and Derek will be the one losing everything. The night before everything went down, Paige couldn't sleep. She stood by Ethan's empty crib, running her fingers over the mobile she'd bought. Little stars and moons that played Brahms' lullaby when you wound it up. She wound it now, listening to the tinny music box melody. Her phone buzzed. Grant's name appeared on the screen. Can't sleep either. His voice was low and warm. Keep thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if Derek suspects? What if the FBI doesn't move fast enough? What if he destroys evidence? Nothing will go wrong. We've covered every angle, triple-checked everything. Paige sat on the floor, pressing the phone to her ear. The apartment was dark except for the city lights through her window. Why are you really doing this? It's not just about your wife. Silence stretched between them. She could hear him breathing. Finally, he said, because I know what it's like to be powerless, to watch everything you love slip away and not be able to stop it. When Rebecca was dying, I had all the money in the world. Best doctors, best hospital. Didn't matter. I couldn't save her. Couldn't save Charlotte. That kind of powerlessness, it changes you. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something important. Sometimes fighting back is the only thing that matters. You have a chance to fight back. Not everyone gets that. I'm going to make sure you win. Will you be there at the hearing? Wouldn't miss it. Something in Paige's chest loosened. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time since the gala, since everything fell apart, she had people who believed in her, who were willing to fight for her, who saw her as something more than a victim. Grant, thank you for everything. Thank me when it's over, when you have Ethan back and Derek is in prison where he belongs. The courthouse was downtown, all marble columns and echoing halls that smelled like floor polish and broken dreams. Paige arrived early, dressed in a navy suit Judith had bought specifically for this, professional but maternal, strong but not threatening, every detail calculated. Simone walked beside her, carrying 3 briefcases full of evidence. Behind them, Judith moved like a general going to war, her heels clicking with military precision. Derek was already there, looking relaxed and confident in his expensive suit. His lawyer was Tom Bradford, the best defense attorney money could buy, $600 an hour. Vanessa sat behind him, playing on her phone, bored. She wore too much makeup and a dress too tight for a courthouse. The bailiff called them in, my baby, Giham. Judge Troy Ashford presided, which made Paige's stomach drop for a moment until she remembered Grant's metadata analysis was already submitted to the State Bar Association 3 days ago. Troy didn't know his career was over. Not yet. Still thought he was untouchable. We're here to determine custody of minor child Ethan William Ashford, Troy began. His voice was bored, like this was already decided, like Paige was wasting everyone's time. Derek's lawyer stood, smoothing his tie. Your Honor, we have substantial evidence that Mrs. Ashford entered into marriage under false pretenses, concealing a significant inheritance that would void the prenuptial agreement. Additionally, her documented mental instability and suspected substance abuse make her an unfit parent. He presented the forged emails with theatrical precision. Timelines of Paige allegedly researching the Holloway Trust before meeting Derek. Character witnesses who claimed she seemed calculating and cold. A psychiatrist who'd never met her testifying about her fragile mental state. Simone didn't object, just sat quietly, checking her watch, waiting. Troy smiled, already reaching for his gavel. This evidence clearly demonstrates fraud and unfitness. I'm prepared to rule in Mr. Ashford's favor on both custody and financial matters. That's when the courtroom doors burst open. 6 FBI agents in Navy windbreakers flooded in like a SWAT team. The lead agent, a woman with steel gray hair and no-nonsense expression, held up a badge. Derek Ashford, you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit racketeering, and violating the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Derek's face went white as bone. What? This is insane. I'm in the middle of a custody hearing. Sir, stand up and put your hands behind your back. Now. Chaos erupted. Tom Bradford was shouting about warrants and due process and unlawful arrests. Vanessa was screaming, her phone out filming. Troy hammered his gavel, demanding order, his face turning purple. Another agent approached the bench with a female WAU-S, Marshal. Judge Troy Ashford, we also have a warrant for your arrest. Charges include bribery, corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Troy's face turned from purple to gray. This is a mistake. I'm a circuit court judge. You can't just... Not anymore, sir. The State Bar has already suspended your license pending investigation. You need to come with us. 2 marshals pulled Troy from the bench. His robes tangled around his legs. He tried to maintain dignity, but failed spectacularly, stumbling down the steps. Derek was handcuffed now, still protesting his innocence. This is a setup. My wife did this. She's trying to frame me. Vanessa tried to film it all on her phone until an agent confiscated it as evidence. Hey, that's mine. You can't take that. Ma'am, step back. This is an active federal investigation. The lead agent turned to Paige. Her expression softened slightly. Mrs. Ashford, we'll need you to come to the federal building to give a statement. But I want you to know, your son is safe. We have officers retrieving him from your ex-husband's residence right now. Child Protective Services will be contacting you within the hour to arrange return of custody. Paige's knees went weak. Her vision blurred. Simone caught her elbow, steadying her. "It's over," Simone whispered. "You won. He's done." Paige watched them lead Derek away, watched him being paraded through the courthouse in handcuffs while people stared and whispered. The same people who'd stepped over her on that red carpet now watched him fall. She didn't smile, didn't gloat, just stood there feeling something shift inside her chest, something that had been broken starting to heal. Grant appeared in the doorway. He must have been waiting outside. Their eyes met across the courtroom. He smiled, small and genuine, and Paige felt tears start to fall. Happy tears this time. 6 months later, Paige stood in front of floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking downtown Chicago. The office was hers now. Earned, not given. Chief Executive Officer of Holloway Industries. Her grandmother's legacy. Finally claimed and wielded with the ruthlessness the old woman would have approved of. The desk was massive mahogany. The chair was leather and perfectly ergonomic. The view stretched for miles. She'd earned every inch of it. Ethan babbled in his playpen behind her desk, pulling himself up on the padded sides. Almost 1 year old now. Walking soon, he'd say mama last week, and Paige had cried for an hour. He looked more like her every day, thank God. Those gray eyes. That stubborn chin. The trial had been swift once it started. Federal prosecutors had so much evidence they barely needed Derek's testimony. The Ponzi scheme, the money laundering, the offshore accounts, Volkov singing like a canary to save himself. Financial records that told a story of systematic fraud spanning 3 years. Derek faced 15 to 20 years on multiple counts. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all charges. Vanessa took a plea deal, testifying against him in exchange for 3 years probation. She'd cried on the stand, playing the victim, claimed Derek manipulated her, claimed she didn't know about the illegal activities. The jury didn't buy it, but the prosecutor needed her testimony. Troy was disbarred and awaiting his own trial. Mitchell, the law clerk, was already in prison. Everyone who'd helped Derek was falling like dominoes, and Paige got her son back. The Second Chances Foundation was thriving, Paige's charity for women escaping abuse. They'd helped 93 families this month, 93 women who didn't have to feel powerless, who had somewhere to go when everything fell apart. There was a knock on her office door. Grant entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place downstairs. He'd been spending more time at Holloway Industries lately, consulting on security systems, advising on tech contracts, finding excuses to stop by her office. Neither of them was pretending anymore. "Ethan's getting big," Grant said, kneeling beside the playpen. The baby reached for him with sticky hands, giggling. They'd bonded quickly. Ethan loved Grant's deep voice and the way he'd make funny faces. "He likes you." The feeling's mutual. Grant stood, moving closer to where Paige stood by the window, close enough she could smell his cologne. "I have something to ask you." Her heart beat faster. "What?" "Come to dinner with me tomorrow night. Somewhere nice. Just us. A real date, not a business meeting disguised as dinner." Paige turned to face him fully. This man who'd helped her when she had nothing, who'd fought beside her without asking for anything in return, who looked at her like she was strong instead of broken, who'd shared his own pain to help her heal hers. "I'd like that very much." His smile transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. "Tomorrow night, then. I'll pick you up at 7. After Grant left, Paige returned to her window, the same city where she'd been humiliated and destroyed, where she'd lost everything, but she'd built something new from the ashes, something stronger, something that was entirely hers. Her phone buzzed. A message from Becca. Her article had won a national press award, the investigative piece that started it all. "Couldn't have done it without you. Drink soon." Another message, this one from Luke. He'd been hired by a Fortune 500 company to rebuild their financial systems, finally getting his reputation back. Simone sent a picture of herself holding a top divorce lawyer in Chicago award. Her business was booming. Everyone who'd helped her was thriving. Everyone who'd hurt her was suffering. The universe had a way of balancing scales eventually. That evening, Paige got ready for a charity gala. The irony wasn't lost on her. 1 year ago, a gala had destroyed her life. Tonight, she was the keynote speaker at a different event. This one hosted by Holloway Industries at the Chicago Cultural Center. When she arrived, photographers lined the entrance. But this time, they were there for her, not as Derek's wife, not as a victim, as herself. Paige Holloway, tech heiress and philanthropist, CEO and mother, survivor and warrior. She wore emerald again. Different dress, same color, a deliberate choice. Reclaiming that night, rewriting that memory. Inside, Grant met her at the entrance, devastating in a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He offered his arm and she took it, letting him guide her through the crowd. People parted for them, smiled, nodded respectfully. She was someone now, someone who mattered. During her speech, Paige spoke about resilience, about rebuilding, about how the worst moments of our lives can become the foundation for something better if we're brave enough to keep building. 1 year ago, she said, her voice steady and strong, amplified through the sound system. I stood outside a building very much like this one. I'd lost everything that night. My marriage, my home, nearly lost my son. I was broken in ways I didn't know a person could break. She paused, scanning the audience. Saw Aunt Judith dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Saw Becca and Luke sitting together, both grinning. Saw Grant watching her with undisguised admiration and something deeper. Saw the faces of women she'd helped through her foundation. Women who understood. But I learned something important that night. Being destroyed isn't the end. It's the beginning. Every woman in this room has been knocked down at some point. The question isn't whether you'll fall, it's whether you'll get back up. And if you do get up, what you'll build with the pieces. The applause was thunderous. Standing ovation. Paige stood at the podium, letting it wash over her, feeling strong for the first time in her life. After the gala, Grant drove her home in his Tesla. They sat in the parking garage for a while, neither quite ready for the night to end. The radio played soft jazz. You were amazing tonight, he said quietly. I felt amazing. Paige laughed, surprised by how true it was. Is that allowed? Am I allowed to feel proud of myself? You're allowed to feel anything you want. You've earned it. He walked her to her door. The hallway was quiet, just the two of them in the dim light. Judith was inside with Ethan, probably asleep on the couch with the baby on her chest like she always was. Grant reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek. I know the timing might not be perfect, and I know you're still healing, still figuring things out. But Paige, I think you're extraordinary. I think you've been extraordinary since the moment we met, and I'd like to be part of your life. Not as a business partner or a friend helping with his problem, as something more. She looked up at him, this good man who'd seen her at her absolute lowest and chose to lift her up instead of exploit her vulnerability, who'd shared his own pain to help heal hers, who made her feel safe and strong simultaneously. The timing is terrible, she agreed honestly. I'm still a mess in a lot of ways. I'm still figuring out who I am now, who I want to be. But Grant, I'd like to figure it out with you. If you're patient, if you're willing to go slow. His smile was slow and genuine and absolutely beautiful. He leaned down, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their kiss was soft and careful, full of promise and possibility in the beginning of something real. When they pulled apart, Paige was smiling. Really, truly smiling from somewhere deep inside her apartment. Judith was indeed asleep on the couch. Ethan sprawled on her chest. They both looked peaceful. Judith woke when Paige entered, noticed the flush in her cheeks, and smiled knowingly. Good night. The best, Paige said honestly. After Judith left, Paige stood in Ethan's nursery, watching him sleep in his crib. His tiny chest rose and fell steadily. His fist curled near his face, perfect and innocent in hers, safe, loved. She thought about Derek, rotting in a federal prison cell, thought about Vanessa, her influencer career destroyed, working retail to survive, thought about Troy, disbarred and disgraced, his reputation shattered. But mostly, Paige thought about herself, about the woman she'd become. She'd been destroyed on that red carpet 1 year ago, humiliated, erased, left bleeding on the concrete while cameras flashed and people walked past like she was garbage. But she'd gotten up. She'd fought back with intelligence instead of anger, with strategy instead of emotion, with ruthless precision. and she'd become someone Derek never imagined. Someone he never bothered to see when she was his wife. Someone he'd dismissed as weak and disposable. Paige Holloway was a CEO, a mother, a philanthropist, a survivor who'd turned her pain into power, a woman who'd been broken and rebuilt herself into something stronger, and she was finally, beautifully, completely free. She whispered to Ethan's sleeping form, "When you're older, I'll tell you this story. Not about revenge, about resilience, about how your mother was destroyed and became unbreakable, about how the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best things, about how sometimes losing everything means you get to rebuild exactly who you want to be." Ethan sighed in his sleep, content and safe. Paige smiled, kissed her fingers, and pressed them gently to his forehead. Tomorrow, she'd wake up as CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, as mother to a beautiful son, as a woman who'd survived hell and emerged victorious. But tonight, she was simply Paige, standing in a nursery, watching her baby sleep, feeling at peace for the first time in her life. The revenge had been satisfying, but the peace was sweeter.